Good afternoon. My name is Mark Seifert. I'm a solutions advisor at the Wisconsin School of Business Center for Professional and Executive Development, or as we like to call ourselves, CPED. My focus is working with our client partners on strategies to help develop their talent, emerging leaders, and the broader organization. So for more than 75 years, CPED has helped individuals and organizations move forward through immersive, hands-on professional development programs, and custom development solutions. We work alongside individuals and organizations to deeply understand their needs so that together we can find the right blend of coaching, consulting, assessments, and development programs that drive sustainable change. If you're interested in learning more, please visit our website at uwcped.org. So if you have questions during our session today, you can submit those questions using either the chat or the Q&A button on the bottom of the Zoom screen. And we'll pose those questions that are submitted during the Q&A at the end of today's webinar. I also want to mention that today's webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be made available within the next few days. So before turning it over to Ann Petry, I'd like to provide a little bit of background on her. We're very excited to have Ann as part of our CPED team providing leadership development and executive coaching. Ann is an experienced leadership and organizational development consultant with over 20 years of experience. She specializes in coaching and educating executives and high potential leaders across various industries with a focus on enhancing communication, collaboration, and effectiveness among leaders. She is also an accomplished author, having co-written the book, Advancing Relationship-Based Cultures. This book was not only well received, but also named the American College of Healthcare Executives Book of the Year, a testament to Ann's expertise and recognition in the field. So I want to thank you for your time today, Ann, and I'm going to hand it over to your more than qualified hands.
Thanks, Mark, and I really appreciate that. And I just want to say how much I love working with CPED because I feel like CPED brings the best of academia and real world challenges and is able to really translate the latest research and what's happening. So it's such a great group of people to work with.
Thank you.
And I also want to acknowledge Brooke, who's behind the scenes with us today. And she is like the wizard behind the curtain, making sure everything runs smoothly. So thank you, Brooke. Appreciate that. Good. Okay, let's dive in. We're going to move through this session pretty quickly here. So I'm going to jump to the next. Oh, Brooke, were you going to do this slide?
I walked through that.
Okay, go for it.
It's a bottom. You can submit questions either through the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen. No worries.
Perfect. Yeah, I imagine everybody is familiar, but I do encourage you guys to jump in with questions as we go along. And there are no dumb questions, especially in this topic. There's huge learning curve happening with AI and leadership. So shall I jump in, Mark?
Go right ahead.
Okay, cool. So here's our plan for today. We're going to talk about the context of AI, kind of ground us in what's happening currently and kind of how we got here. We're going to talk about some key skills that we need to hone as leaders in this revolutionary time. I'm going to share a case study that will sort of flesh out those key skills. And then I'm going to invite you to think about a challenge that you're struggling with, and we'll apply some frameworks to that challenge. And as we go through this next 45 minutes, I really encourage you to think about your own organization and situation, and don't just take my word for it, but filter what you're learning through the lens of your own experience. So the context. I find it super interesting, and you may too, among my colleagues and there's just tremendous anxiety about all the AI jargon. It's really crazy and it's constantly changing, and it is very intimidating. And I want to just say that to demystify some of this and how we're all sort of coming along to learn what the different phrases and words mean. And so having a glossary available is super helpful. I use it. This one happens to be from the Turing Institute. And it's valuable because it helps demystify the terms, and then it also can promote understanding because you can then start to have establish a common language and a shared understanding within your departments and teams. So just beginning at the very beginning, what are we talking about and how do we talk about it? This is a great glossary also because it has just pop out definitions, which I find super helpful. Okay, and AI is making the headlines, a huge understatement, right? But let's look at it in the context of history. And I found this really interesting graph, which is AI scholarly articles. And it is interesting because you'll notice for like the last 25 years or so, there's been very little movement in terms of real change and innovation in AI. But then we see this uptick happening. And this is largely a result of the 2017 Google paper that 8 scientists published. And it is considered a landmark paper, a watershed. And some even think it's like the most important paper in technology history. It is the cornerstone in the field, and it talks about the transformer model, which then was taken by OpenAI, and they leveraged it for ChatGPT. And so you can see this exponential increase happening right after 2017 and up until now, where we're just experiencing this deluge of information. Another interesting graphic here is this market map. Now, I don't expect you to be able to see all the small print. The idea is that it is a map of the current new data and AI infrastructure that's happening. I mean, brand new. And so, as you can see, there's just tremendous innovation happening. And there's this massive shift happening in the marketplace where we're trying to catch up with the AI technology and infrastructure to make it happen in our organizations. And so it really speaks to this shift in innovation and the infrastructure that's required to make it happen. So we know AI's potential is immense. I mean, that is for sure. But along with that comes enormous challenges. And we see these challenges every day. I saw it today on a LinkedIn post that I mentioned. Ethical concerns. There's a lot of anxiety, legal questions around copywriting and infringements. And there's also disinformation, hallucinations. And then the biggest one of all, just the unknowns, unknown unknowns. All of these things are coming together for us right now in our organizations. We see it in the headlines too. I don't know if you guys saw this in San Francisco, the Kaiser nurses protesting AI and the fear of dehumanizing the care, the patient experience. Banks are seeing employees resist adoption of AI and feeling that their jobs will be eliminated. And organized labor is also being disrupted. And, you know, just an interesting aside, my brother is an attorney and he happens to have a client out in San Francisco, and he was at a talk that was being given to his client executives, and it was Mark Andreessen, who is Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capital group. And one of the things that Mark just said sort of off the cuff that was that the whole field of law, attorneys is going to go away. And my brother came back with just like he received a gut punch. And of course, that's hyperbole and speculation, but you can see why there's so much anxiety happening. So this is all to say that this is why we need leadership. It is so crucial right now that we have wise, grounded leaders to shepherd our people through this transition, which will be going on for a very long time. And I want to just say, how are we doing? So here's some data, some recent data. How are we doing? So 74% of CEOs think that their teams are already skilled appropriately in generative AI. But only 29% of their executive teams agree. So there's quite a gap there within the executive team. 80% of organizations feel they'll need to adopt AI to stay competitive. No surprises there. But 60% worry leadership lacks a plan or vision to implement it. So I ask you just to think about these numbers and see if they ring true for your own environment. So let's move on and talk about some key skills that leaders are going to need to navigate this environment. We're moving from theory to practice, and I am sharing this paper that just came out last week, actually, John Sfiocla in HBR, about the 6 essential disciplines that organizations will need to manage the AI revolution. And the number one discipline is behavior change and how work gets done. And this is really at the heart of what leaders are facing. There's controlled experimentation, tying our AI experimentation to existing measures, data management, which has always been important, and developing our people, again, a key piece of this because the people will drive AI. And lastly, systems thinking, realizing that we need to look beyond our immediate team to the ripple effect of how things are impacting us and other businesses in our ecosystem. So today, we're going to be speaking specifically about behavior change and developing people, 2 of these 6 essential disciplines. And I want to now drill down and ask you to think about your own experience, because I think there's nothing like the data, I'm using that term loosely, but the data of our own experience. And by that, I mean, when we have certain events happen in our life that we learn a lot from, it provides data for us in a way that is not conceptual. It's actually like an embodied understanding, right? So I want you to think about a leadership success and what were the mindsets and behaviors that contributed to or enabled that success. So a leadership success that you had, and it doesn't have to be in a formal role. It could just be, it could have been as a kid on a team, a sports team, or within a team where you sort of helped guide the team in a way, even though you didn't have a formal position of power. And as you think about these mindsets and behaviors, I want you to type in the keywords that come to your mind in the chat, if you would. Just going to pause. Accountability. Open to suggestions, inclusivity, decisive, directive, working together, teamwork, personal attention, flexibility, listening. That's a good one. Wonder, empowering, collaboration, proactive, building cohesion. These are awesome. Curiosity, so good. This data that you have from your own leadership success is huge, and context is critical, Mary Jo. I totally agree. And bias awareness, awareness of our own biases and how we tend to look to confirm what we think is already true. And being respectful. Love that, Melissa. So I start here because you already have tremendous understanding of what it takes to build success within yourself and others. And I think you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't kind of already ahead of the curve in some ways. But I want you to leverage what you already know and then apply it to these current challenges. So what you guys are pointing to that I want to speak to is this notion of adaptive skills. And what we're talking about here are the non-technical skills that are so critical to organizations and teams being successful. This particular survey was from IBM. They did it in 2016, executives asking them what the most important behavioral skills that were required for the workforce in 2016, and then again in 2018. And this was a global survey. And I want to just acknowledge, like, this is not really current data. 2018 is a while ago, but I did tremendous amount of research looking for a more current example. And all of the research that I found pointed to exactly what was discovered here, was this migration from technical skills, computer and software application skills, fundamental core capabilities, industry specific knowledge, like this migration of those being the key skills that organizations need, to these more behavioral skills, which are much more in the language of business, adaptive skills. They are what is going to be required to manage this constant change. And not to get ahead of myself, but why do you, just in your own mind, why do you think these skills are so critical today? Anybody want to chime in? Indeed, adaptability is critical. I mean, think about the roles in the organizations today that you have. How many of them are going to change in the next year or two? Yes, machines can learn technology, and we need to manage people. That's so great, Kelly and Jacqueline. We're going to be asked to do more with less, so we can move with constant change. And collaboration is key, Jenny. So I think, thinking about my brother's experience with law, the fear that his entire profession may go away, even though that is probably not realistic, but the idea that we're all going to probably have to reskill to some degree in order to be effective. And this is just something that we need to acknowledge and be aware of. So when I say adaptive skills, I'm really talking about this notion of adaptive challenges require these adaptive skills. And adaptive challenges are unique in that they are complex. They're usually tied to something deeper happening, and they often require like new learning. Often the solution isn't really known to us, and we have to go figure it out. It's not obvious. It's not like a technical solution where you can go to a software company and buy a piece of software that you can integrate. It's something less tangible than that. And often, and this is true for example, for the nurses that were resistant to AI, those affected by the challenge, the stakeholders, they're going to be most invested in the solutions. And so these obstacles, as I mentioned, they're really about these these intangible things, our hearts and minds, our relationships, and even peeling this back one more layer, these are often related to, and I want you to think about it in your own experience, the fear of losing status, a sense of uncertainty, a loss of control, conflict, a sense of fairness. It should be fair. Now think about these headlines and these particular primal fears that we all have. How many of these headlines are related to something relative to this? A loss of control, a sense of fairness, a sense of losing status. In every situation underneath the resistance, these fears and sort of primal triggers that cause us to fight, fly, or flee, fight, flight, or flee, freeze, are triggered. And so this is where we need to be kind of conscious of how they're showing up. And I'm going to just share a case study as an example to sort of put this in practical terms, real world terms. So this is a case study that my business partner and I were involved in with a client. The situation was there was a leadership team, an executive team of about 15 people that had an offsite with a facilitator, a coach, and their task was, their objective was to come up with a 10-year vision. And this is a mid-size regional financial services firm, about 20 billion, I would say, that had been experiencing tremendous growth in the past 5 years. They were really doing well, and they wanted to just leverage this momentum that they had. And so they were super excited to really become leaders in the region. And so what they came up with in the offsite was that they were going to invest heavily in new technology. They were going to implement a new tech stack, which they knew they needed to do to keep up with the bigger banks who are already well automated and had many contactless features. And they figured they knew the entire financial services firm would be affected in one way or another. All the roles would probably experience some shift or change. So they came away from this visioning and strategy session, and they hired my business partner and I to do a readiness assessment. Oh, I should say their focus during the offsite was the answer to their problems was largely lied in upgrading their technical capabilities. They really felt like that was the center of gravity for them. So they then invited us to do a readiness assessment to see how ready are people to execute on this vision. And so what we learned was, as I mentioned, they had been going through tremendous growth. They had acquired other firms, and they had been doing tremendous business as a result of the low mortgage rates during COVID. And so employees were working heroically, and they were already stretched. They also told us that they felt that they weren't included. So they really didn't know much about what this vision was or what it would ultimately have to do with them, other than it was a C-suite directed initiative that they were hearing about now. And then they were all wondering, okay, so there's this 10-year vision. How is this going to change my job? And many of these people had spent their entire careers at the organization and had been extremely loyal to the firm. And felt that the relationships they had with customers was why the firm had been so successful up till now. So these readiness issues in order to execute on that vision largely had to do with adaptive challenges. No one was really speaking to or concerned with or felt that they didn't need to do some tech upgrades, but it was more the things around the tech upgrades that were concerning them. So in a sense of urgency, the leadership moved on very quickly and decided they wanted to carve out a team under the CIO with new IT FTEs to manage the tech integration. They didn't want to lose time. They felt that they had to maintain their competitive edge to move forward. So they invested a lot of money in technology and consulting to bring it online. And they gave the IT team wide latitude to sort of do what they needed to do to implement this plan. These largely technical solutions didn't incorporate or consider the adaptive challenges. So there really wasn't any attention given to sort of an internal communication plan so that team members could be kept up on what's happening with the IT and upgrades. There wasn't real resource allocation for any job skilling other than if it was technology specific. And they didn't allocate any specific resources to support the people side of change. So why, we ask, like, why is this? This is so common that, I think many of you can probably relate. It's so very common. And it's in part because the technical solutions are more straightforward. They feel more straightforward. They are complex, no doubt. But it seems like you can hire a consulting firm, buy the software, put it together, and build that tech stack. Whereas the adaptive challenges, they feel messy. They feel more hard to dissect and get to the bottom of. And so I think consequently, many of us, many leaders just want to ignore them and hope that people kind of move on and figure it out as we go along. But this creates a tremendous drag on the organization when certain things could be put into place that would enable things to run more smoothly. So in this case, we recommended a workload management plan, which would take into consideration how busy people were already and provide some staging in order to integrate the new technology in a way that was manageable. We recommended feedback mechanisms so that stakeholders, especially those closest to the work, could be involved in the IT decisions. And this became especially apparent when we found out that there was an entire automation happening in one of the functional areas that even the executives didn't take into consideration that this was redundant to what was already happening over here. And this idea of upskilling in order to really capture the knowledge, the legacy knowledge of people that had been there many years, this knowledge that wasn't written down anywhere, but was critical to the success of the firm, and resource allocation for these purposes. With these going hand in hand, there can be a much more smooth transition, and it doesn't have to be so anxiety producing to staff. This has direct implications to what we're doing now with AI. And I just want to invite you, as we jump to this next section, to think about a current or potential challenge that you or your teams are facing. And as you sort of ponder that for a second, we're going to ask some poll questions, and this is where Brooke's going to help us. Okay, the first poll. How would you categorize these challenges? Mostly technical, mostly adaptive, or a mix of both? We need the music in the background while people are voting. Okay, so most people, and I'm not surprised, feel it's a mix of both. And then another contingent feel it's mostly adaptive, which is interesting, actually. So the behavioral, teamwork, communication, really interesting. Okay, let's move on to the next question. In your experience, which type of challenge receives more attention and resources? More attention to the technology challenges, more attention to the adaptive challenges, or both? And I should say equally, it's a little unfair because budgets for some things are more expensive than others. But we'll see. Okay, so 15% felt that their organizations were addressing both equally. I think that's awesome, actually. Um, another set of you feel like more resources are going to adaptive challenges. But 3/4, and not surprisingly, feel that technology sort of trumps everything else, and people sort of have to manage as they go. Okay, let's look at the next question. How confident are you in your team's ability to address adaptive challenges compared to technical ones? Okay, this is awesome. Very confident in the technical challenges, equally confident in both. Um, and some are confident in addressing adaptive challenges. Okay, interesting mix. Okay, last question. What do you think the main reason organizations neglect adaptive challenges? Some leaders, I should say, not organizations, some leaders. Yeah, how about all of the above, Mark? I didn't think of that one. Okay, harder to identify. perceived as less urgent. Those were about the same. Lack of skills and knowledge, that's less of an issue and requires more time and effort. Okay, so that's interesting. Harder to identify and measure. Very good. So as you think about the challenges in your organization, we're going to take it to the next level. And now I want you to think about one or two things that you would like to improve, that you would like to bring back to your organization, or that you have been thinking about relative to something going on within your team. And I want you to consider this criteria for your improvement goal. It should be within your sphere of influence, stated positively. So in other words, it's like, I don't want my team to resist AI. That's very general, but it should be, I want my team to be leaders in our organization in flexibility and creativity, or something like that. It should be a process or behavior, not an outcome. So a specific behavior that you can recognize is happening. There should be clear room for improvement and something you care about. So let me give you an example. Maybe something that you want to improve is your team's readiness for AI changes by having them identify use cases at weekly meetings. Or you want to improve your team's creative experimentation with AI in low-risk ways. So these are two very specific interventions that you could initiate. And I'm going to apply then the adaptive skills to these improvements. So let's look at the framework for dissecting challenges, adaptive challenges in particular. We're talking about a need when you're thinking about a challenge that you can't quite get your arms around, you're not sure how to measure it, it's perceived as less urgent. It can be helpful to do these things. These are 6 very concrete things that leaders can do to manage adaptive challenges, these hard, intangible challenges that we deal with every day. One is to just get on the balcony. So I was thinking about this today, and one of the things that occurred to me, I remember when I was in college, the university had, sidewalks right across the quad, but there was always paths that were cut through, that were not paved, but that students used all the time. And so when you got on the balcony, you could see these shortcuts happening, and it just provided an interesting perspective on how people are actually moving around. Another thing that you can do is to start to notice where there's friction. And this is really interesting to pay attention to. For example, there may be friction between your team and another team. There could be friction between 2 people within your team. Identifying these friction points can be crucial to solving adaptive challenges. This next one is less easy to do for sure, but I think it's something that we all need to be aware of, which is this idea that there is a window of tolerance that's of stress that we can manage. And to be in a state of flow, you want to be challenged but not overwhelmed. And so what we're constantly trying to do for ourselves and our team is help them to manage that level of stress and even become aware of it, so that they can self-manage and take responsibility for that when it's possible. this is an obvious one, avoiding the shiny object. But this one actually is something that comes up in coaching quite a bit. It is often hard for leaders to delegate, and in particular with the idea of experimentation, letting people experiment, even if it's something that will fail, might fail. And I think this is where we need to get out of our comfort zone and let other people become more involved. And then listening to people closest to the work. Often we forget to include the people that are actually doing the work to get their input. And so now I want to look at this framework applied to this goal. I want to improve my team's creative experimentation with AI in low risk ways. So what can you do? You can get on the balcony and think about what your team is currently doing. And there's a framework that you may have seen. It's WINS. It's words, images, numbers, and sounds. Words, images, numbers, and sounds, WINS. These are the things that are most, any work related to those are the most quickly going to be affected by AI. And so being able to help your team even start to think about more broadly, getting on the balcony, where can we experiment with AI and actually gain some efficiencies? And it could be a fun practice. You can also think about where there's friction. So if there is an area of friction, you can think about how you might be able to experiment with resolving that friction. And it helps to call it an experiment, because then the stakes are lower and people don't feel so anxious about it. I think it's helpful to talk to the team as a whole about just acknowledging that we're in the midst of this huge, massive technology shift. I mean, you're probably already talking about it, but just to name it and to encourage people to think about how they can manage themselves, their situation, in a way that's tolerable and healthy. Avoiding the shiny object. So here I think it's important to narrow and focus on one or two things that you think could be interesting to experiment with. And then let your team have at it. I would delegate and let them be creatively iterate. It could even be a competition, and involving those closest to the work. So this is a framework, and this was developed by Ron Heifetz, who's at the Kennedy School of Public Service. And I find these enormously helpful and transferable to many situations. And at their heart, they are responses to adaptive challenges. These are adaptive skills that we can apply to anything. You could tape this up on your desk to remind you. So at the end of the day, we want to remember that people propel AI. And I'm going to share some interesting data from an Ernst & Young survey. What will make people more comfortable about using AI at work? So this is really interesting and something you can take away right now. Begin to share best practices on responsible AI. Look for opportunities to give your staff training and upskilling. This is important because, look, AI is going to be a part of our careers forevermore. And AI is right now at its least refined. And there's always going to be a learning curve for us. So recognizing that, AI upskilling is really going to be a part of our lives forever. And this other thing of responsible and ethical use, I mean, it's something that may not be talked about because we just don't have the answers, but I think acknowledging it is incredibly valuable in terms of promoting more trust. And this was, how organizations can stop skyrocketing AI use from fueling anxiety. So what you can do this week, today, set aside time to practice thinking creatively. The number one skill that was identified by executives, and I somewhat find this hard to believe, was creativity. And I guess, what they're getting at is there are just all kinds of different ways that we can begin to implement some of these new technologies into our work, and thinking about it creatively will be helpful. The other thing I have found helpful is I've been on calls with professionals, and the leaders establish right out of the gate that, look, there's no dumb questions. We're all trying to figure this out. And you can feel the anxiety go down immediately, and people speak up much more quickly. And to that point, be intentional about having everyone speak up, and even to the point where you call on people who are quiet and invite them to share what they're thinking or what they might be concerned about. I want to just say about this, speaking up, there's a great book called The Courage to Speak Up by Jim Dittert. And he considers this the corollary to psychological safety, which we've heard so much about. But you may, as a leader, do everything you possibly can to create a safe environment for people to speak up. And yet there are still some people in the room that are quiet. And what he points out is that speaking up in a way is a skill that some people need to learn. And so leaders need to provide enabling behaviors for those staff to learn how to speak up, to learn how to frame their questions, learn how to identify effective ways to frame their questions and frame their point of view. So these are all skills that we can mentor and coach our staff on. And then, as we talked about, experimentation on low-risk projects. So these are things that we can start doing now that are at the heart of adaptive leadership and provide us the opportunity to emerge as leaders if we're not in a formal leadership role. And I think, it's essential that we steward AI on our teams and in our organizations. And with that, I want to share some resources that are really valuable, that I've found as exceptionally valuable. One is GAI Insights Learning Lab. They have daily newsletters, and they do a good job of saying like essential, optional, because they're constantly scanning the literature and the news for articles that are relevant. So I highly recommend that one. IBM Institute for Business Value has some good stuff. The Ethical Data Forum, and then Alan Turing Institute. But on a more close to home, and I think actually really, really valuable in terms of forming networks of peers, is the opportunities for exec ed at UW. I really think particularly these 3 classes or courses, workshops, would be valuable. I have found that no matter where you are in the organization, being able to influence is a really important skill. And innovation is going to continue to be at the forefront. So being able to think strategically about innovation, and then leadership beyond management, which is much of what we'll be doing or are doing already. So So that's what I have for now for today. Mark, any thoughts or questions?
Um, yeah, so I would encourage anybody that does have any questions, please do put them in the chat. And we will definitely get to that next. But I just wanted to thank you so much, Anne, and wanted to let you know about additional opportunities to further develop your agility as a leader. We offer several professional development programs to help you advance your skills and gain new tools to help you be more successful in a leadership role. So we can certainly customize these programs too. So what you see on the screen are open enrollment programs here at the Funo Center, but we tailor them to organizations' specific needs too and bring them to you. So if you want to learn more about those programs, certainly go to go.wisc.edu/management dash CPED. That's a mouthful, but please do. So let me see if we have, bear with me as I move around here. I do have one question that I'd like to bring to the forefront here, which is interesting about. So, how can leaders develop this kind of adaptability and flexibility within their teams? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think doing an exercise similar to what we did today on thinking about the data of your own experience. So having your team talk about ways in which they've been resilient personally or as a team. For example, going through COVID, many teams had to move very quickly to figure out solutions to a challenge they had never been through before. And so it just reminds us, what skills we had to kind of work it out in the moment. B, that we can have confidence that we can do it because we did it before. And C, that these skills are transferable to our current situation. And the other thing that I highly recommend is peer groups,
Mm,
like mastermind groups. I think it's always great when you can meet with a group of others, not necessarily in your organization, but who are also interested in this topic, and take turns presenting to each other on what's currently happening. So those are two things that I can think of.
and it's good to get that diverse insight from other
Yeah,
industries,
right. Yeah.
other experiences. So I don't know if this is repetitive or not, but what personal development strategies do you recommend to enhance adaptability? Is that
Yeah, sort of playing off what I just said.
yeah,
I think it can be really valuable to do peer coaching, to do journaling, look at the ways that you have been adaptable and resilient in the past, and that creates confidence.
for sure. Well, Anne, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank you all for joining us. We really value your time. We know you're all busy. If you do have any questions or want to learn more about CPED, the easiest way is go to uwcped.org. We hope you do, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we give you 7 minutes back into your day. Thank you so
And
much, everyone.
yeah, do connect on LinkedIn if you can. I'd love to stay
Yeah,
in touch. Thanks, everybody.
thank you all.